Oh, wow, this morning was just... Oh, yeah, I get to travel around everywhere, and I tell you, this was a breath of fresh air. And I really feel like I belong here. I feel very... Yeah, I feel like I'm part of this fellowship. So thank you for your warm welcome, everyone. And this is just... This little fellowship gathering, you can just see that the saints are being equipped to take the good news out. So thank you so much. Thank you, Isaac. And I'm just so happy. It just warms my heart to see Isaac and Em and the girls, wherever they are. There they are, Beck, and... Up there, Caitlin. Yeah, there's others. Yeah, so I haven't got my glasses on. So just, it just warms my heart to know that they're in a fellowship, that they're being looked after and cared for and equipped. So, yeah, thank you to all of you, and thank you to Todd and Brett and all of the leaders and the elders. It's just beautiful. So... Really, I felt myself in tears, and I have empathy deficit disorder, so that's a big thing. That's a joke, but anyway. Yeah, so that's a big thing. You know, this morning I was out, I went for a walk, and I decided to go to the boardwalk because the other day, Em and the girls and we all went there for coffee so many days ago. And we were waited on by this amazing young guy. He was just so full of life and everything like that. And we were just sort of joking around with him and everything like that. And I just asked him, before we left, I asked him, what's your name? And he said, Daniel. And I said, do you know that name is in the Bible? And he said, yeah. And I said, wow, you know about Daniel? And they're like, yeah, where did you get that name? You know, just talking. And he said, it was my parents. And we'd had this conversation. I knew that he was living with his girlfriend, and they were out here from the UK, and they were on a workers' visa or whatever. And so I thought, wow, what if he had really strong Christian parents? Because it sort of seemed like that. And he was this young man. Wouldn't they love you to just share the gospel with them or something? And so I told him, I said, I write books, I want to give you a book. And he said, that'd be great. And he told me when he worked and whatever. And so the days were counting down, and today is his last day. And this is my last day here because I go tomorrow morning. And I thought, I've got to get there. And so this morning I decided to get up early, go for a walk. And he said he'd be here from, 9 to 2. Yeah, 9 to 2. So... I went for a walk and I took the book, but before I did, I really prayed about it and I wrote him a message from Daniel and describing these young men that were chosen for the king to be trained in the language and the culture and all that sort of thing. And Daniel was one of them, and we know there were others, Shadrach, Meshach and Abednego. And they could learn. They were very, very bright young men, handsome, healthy, all of these things. And so one of the... so I just wrote that quote in there, but I thought, I wonder what Daniel means. Maybe I'll just put what Daniel means. Now, before I say that... I was listening to this, does anyone know Dennis Prager? Yeah. He's a Jewish guy, he's not a Christian, amazing guy, so full of wisdom. And he's written books on Exodus and others. So he's a practicing Jew. Anyway, he said, and he loves Christians, and he said, Christians always go around saying, their message is God loves you. And I said, yeah, you hear that all the time, God loves you and all that sort of thing. He said, I would say God judges you. And that really struck me. I have been thinking and thinking and thinking about it. God judges you. He said, if people knew that God judged you, that would be a different message. I don't judge you, but God judges you. God will judge you. So that was going on in my mind. So when I looked up the name of Daniel, it means God is my judge. God is my judge. And so I wrote that in the book as well. You know, the Hebrew meaning for Daniel is God is my judge. It was just very interesting. So I saw this guy this morning, and he wasn't there when I got there, and they said, oh, yes, I know you. He said that this lady's going to come back and give me a book. And so anyway, so I gave him Lost Boys, and I really hope he reads it. I really hope that he reads the message and that he would know the true king. But when I was walking back, and I had to hightail it back because I was running out of time. It was about 10:30. That was why I was a bit late this morning. Walking back along this rocky creek on this walkway, and I looked down, and here in this rocky creek, clear water, was sitting one of those parrots, you know, with the really red heads. I don't know, what are they called? Rosella, yeah, some sort of... And the colours were incredibly bright, and it was sitting in the water because I'd watched the ducks in the water and things like that, but here was this Rosella. It was so bright. I just stood there and looked at it because I could just look down at it. It was sitting in the water, and then it was just flicking water over itself, having a bath, just flicking water over itself. And I thought, oh, you always see Rosellas all in these big flocks in the trees everywhere. And I had seen them when I'd went on that walk before, all these Rosellas. And here I saw this just one Rosella quietly sitting in the water, just flicking that clear water, and he was sitting right in it like, oh, this is great. And it just reminded me, because I had just spent the hour, even though, you know, I was there for giving Daniel the book, I sat there quietly and I was reading the Word and reflecting on the Word. And I just feel like God was saying, you know, this is it. You know, it's like sitting in the water. And, you know, it could have been a bird that was just sort of brown in colour, because you were watching the wood ducks and things like that. And they're very camouflaged, they can be and all that. But this just stood out. And I thought, I wonder, you know, the more that we wash in God's Word, the more the colours and the brightness. And, you know, we heard what Todd said about, you know, if there's hidden sin in our lives and all of those sort of things. But getting into God's Word, it's like the washing and the brightness. So that was my little message this morning, and it was almost like that being here this morning as well. So, and I thought about it. How do I start this? I'm technically challenged. Oh, there it is. Yeah. So I've titled this talk Habitus. Some of my team have heard some of this before. But habitus is this old word, Latin word probably, that means your habit, what you do, how you live your life. It just, you know, how we live our life from day to day, how we react to the challenges of just everyday life habitually. Do you wake up in the morning and go and sit in the water and flick water on your... Do you spend time in the Word? What if someone offends you? How do you deal with that? How do we deal with every situation throughout the day? Do we react in anger? Do we flare up? Do we... or do we act in grace and peace and so on? What about all the temptations that we face daily? Do we act in Christ-likeness, or do we react distinctively or destructively without the fruit of the Spirit? Love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, gentleness. Are we reacting like that? And recently I was asked to speak, probably a month or two ago, to some young people about how can they live their Christian life in this world, this pagan world that is so cultural to the Christian way of life, or we're countercultural, whatever, but so different. How do you just go from day to day and live your life differently? So for a young person, what would it look like to live out our Christian values and our allegiance to the true King of Kings and Lord of Lords? In a world that is so hostile to the Christian way. So for me, I believe that it's really important, and we can get a really good picture if we go back to the early church. And I do go back to the early church in my book, the new book, The Next Revolution. I talk about this toward the end. So this is a little glimpse into that. So I'm going to begin with a story about something that happened in the early church. And it's a true story from the Fox's Book of Martyrs. So it's a story of Perpetua. So there was a city called Carthage in Roman Africa, in the Roman Empire. Today it's called Tunisia. And the proconsul, he scheduled this public event in the arena. It was a day of games and spectacles that to be performed in this big amphitheatre and to celebrate the birthday of the emperor's son. And people were seated in the theatre according to their importance, because it was a very hierarchical society. There were the people at the bottom and then there were the people at the top. So in the arena were the victims, which were the animals, the gladiators, and the criminals. The gladiators were victims because they had to fight to the death. And the criminals were allowed to be sold to use in the games because this gave much more entertainment. And it also served as a warning to the people, don't do what those criminals have done, because you could end up like this as well. So on that day in March 203 AD, the people went to the amphitheatre to participate in a public event, and they were just behaving normally. According to their local customs, they were maybe going to watch the equivalent of a footy match like we did yesterday. But on this day, they encountered something really different. They saw Christians, people who embodied uncommon allegiances and responded in inexplicable reflexes, the way they handled themselves in this situation. And it really challenged the behaviour of the norm. So the crowds were emotionally engaged. They were oscillating between intrigue and fury, kill them, attraction, revulsion. And an eyewitness account was written about this event, particularly focusing on this young lady named Perpetua, who was around the age of 21 years old. And who, unlike the crowd, or unlike the others in a group, she was of noble birth. So all others were sort of slaves, very poor or slaves. But she was of noble birth, so she'd been educated. So she wrote all up until this time, and she gave her notes to someone, and they watched the event, they were at the thing, and they wrote afterwards. And so that's why we have this record of what happened. So in this group of prisoners, they were from this small town, like about 30 kilometres away, and they were all catechumens. So they were all being discipled for baptism. So the new converts actually in this early church usually didn't get baptized till a year later. So they were disciple, because you had to decide if you were going to get baptized. That was a decision. You were basically signing your death certificate. That's what baptism meant. So they got arrested, and apparently their teacher, an older man, hadn't been, he wasn't there or something like that. Maybe they were having a prayer meeting. Who knows? And so you know what he did? This elderly man went and got himself arrested because he knew for sure they were going to go to the arena. And he wanted to be with them. That is how much he loved them. So they were in prison a few weeks before they actually went to the arena. So here was them with their teacher, still teaching them in prison. Now, Perpetua could have been released. Her father came to her in prison. He was of noble birth, and he said, all you have to do is just deny, that you're a Christian, and you'll be set free. And so he was pleading with her, trying to talk her into this. And finally she said, she was resolved. She said, see that jug? They called him a pitcher, See that jug there, that pitcher? And he said, yeah. And she said, can that be called anything else but a pitcher, a water pitcher? And he said, well, no. And she said, neither can I be called anything else but a Christian. So up until that time, people were allowed, because they knew this game was coming up, let's go and have a look at who's going to be in the arena. So they could go and see them, view them in prison. And the way they conducted themselves, they probably sang and all of that sort of thing. But the night before, they celebrated the Last Supper, and all these people were watching them. This was really weird. And not only that, there was another girl. She was 14. She was a slave girl. Her name was Felicitas. She was 9 months pregnant. And they were praying all these weeks in hospital that she would have the baby so that she didn't have to go into the arena, fully pregnant. And she did, and they were rejoicing. So the little baby was saved. So when the day came, they marched into the arena triumphantly, without cringing, and they had readied themselves for this, even though they didn't fully know what to expect. And some accounts say they were forced to be naked. Some say one of the things that they would do to these prisoners, they would often make them dress up in the gods, in outfits that depicted their gods, and then they'd all fight, and it made it much more exciting. And it said that they were ordered to dress, and Perpetua spoke on their behalf and said, no, we want to keep our identity. We're not some gods or whatever. And so the two women, Perpetua and Felicitas, a noble woman and a slave girl, these wild beasts come with horns, and they were tossed and, tossed in the air by this wild cow or bull or whatever. And they got up, Perpetua got up, and then she went and helped Felicitas. And people were like, what? A noble woman is helping a slave girl. Wouldn't you just want to save yourself? And so they were, the Christians were expressing love horizontally. And it was out of their framework for thinking. So the games went on. They were torn asunder, they were tossed, they were run through, and they were attacked by gladiators and wild animals. And at the very end, they all helped each other up, and they were bloodied. They all got into this little huddle, and their teacher admonished them. Actually, first of all, there was a guard who he got converted by the prisoners, by their leader, and he was with he was one of the guards in there. And this leader took off the ring of this guard and dipped it in his blood and gave it back to him and said, "Remember me and remember the faith." And then the little group of Christians, it said, gave each other a farewell kiss of peace before they were run through with the sword. And their martyrdom was sealed. So Perpetua was the oldest. She was 21. And the crowd reacted in all different ways. But mostly they were indifferent. But some had been jarred awake from their former ways of thinking and acting. And it's reported that some became believers because of that. So Perpetua lived in a godless society. And the Roman culture at the time could be described by these points that I have listed here. Now, at first glance, it would seem that our culture may be very different. But if you dig beneath the surface, we see that we are more alike than you think. I could go through a whole lot of these, like religious. We actually live in a very highly superstitious society. Omens, divination, we've got astrology, crystals, dream catchers, tarot cards, there's all sorts of things. Violent culture. How much violence do we watch on movies and things like that? Little kids see, I think they did some research, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of violent acts before, while they're little kids on TV and things like that. And we just love it. They have public executions and things like that, but violence as well. Infant exposure and abortion. Can talk about that. And it says there, vertical society. People say, Australians, we're very egalitarian. That means, we pull the tall poppy down, everyone's equal and all that sort of thing. But we have these elites in society that we all look up to. Even like Hollywood. We have politicians and celebrities and all that sort of thing that we all look up to. They seem to be so much wiser than us down here. But I want to just pick up on this thing about women being inferior to men. Because at first glance we think, in our society, are women inferior to men? Well, I want to put something to you that to challenge your thinking. The feminist ideology wants women to be more like men. And their ideology glorifies the male attributes, we talked about them the other night, of strength, aggression, stoicism, sexual prowess without emotion and connection, and so on. Now, these values are valued by feminists over the feminine attributes of virtue, gentleness, care, inner strength of character, fiercely protective of the vulnerable and weak, homes, mothers, and much more. So if you just watch the movies, you'll the women now are, hard-nosed women, cops, CIA agents, investigators, fighting men and beating men. Women superheroes now that act like men, they beat men up, and they have little emotions in doing it, even though they're really condemning men. It's so toxic, men are so aggressive and they have no emotions and it's so unhealthy and all that sort of thing. And yet we see that this is held up as, by the celebrities, by movies, which is the peak of our culture. So all of this to say that feminists are perpetuating a hatred toward the godly attributes, natural innate attributes that God has given women. And in essence, it's a very hatred toward the very, or it's a hatred toward the very essence of womanhood. There's not just a war on men, there's a war on women. And it's mostly by women. And we can see now that, no one knows the definition of what a woman is. So, saying that women are inferior, yes, women are being devalued. Yesterday we talked about stay-at-home mums. I think that's such a devaluing phrase. Rather than, motherhood is so devalued. It's a tragedy, and I think the church should be really celebrating motherhood. And men don't get off the hook either. The way that men treat women as sexual objects for their pleasure by viewing pornography, that's a big thing today. It is degrading of womanhood as well. And it promotes a callousness toward women. So we wonder a lot about how the early church grew and what was it about Christians. So this is the culture that Christians were in the early church. It was so pagan and godless, and I think our culture is a bit the same. And that loved violence even to the point of putting Christians to death. So for sure, we live in a pagan society. Paganism is humanistic. It's simply the natural gravity of us, of the human spirit to the line of least resistance. So if we don't have God, what's our natural inclination? It's religion in its fallen state where anything goes. We make up our own rules. So what was it that distinguished the Christians from the culture that they lived in? So I'm going to show you 7 aspects of how the early Christians lived their lives, or their habitus, that made them stand out as holy and pure in a wicked and perverse generation. So a lot of people have done research and studied this, and it's really interesting to read through these things about how the Christians conducted their lives. Integrity in business, if they owned business. They didn't rip off their customers. They were trustworthy. They were willing to speak the unadorned truth about the product that they were selling. They refused to retaliate when others treated them unethically. When borrowing money from pagans, they didn't follow the customary practice of giving guarantees under oath. So that was forbidden. The Christians did not do that. It was let your yes be yes and your no be no. Very likely it was a refusal to engage in litigation in the law courts. They just spoke plainly and honestly, and they charged fair prices. Sexual discipline. There's a picture there of the Vestal Virgins, because it was all part of their worship. They had to keep this fire going, because as the Roman empires, they'd go out to war and they'd fight and expand the Roman Empire. They believed that the god of Vesta, the god of war and all that sort of thing, if they kept the fire burning 24/7 and all that sort of thing, that it would give them success on the battlefield. So, and if they let the fire go out, they would be killed, basically. That was the punishment. And they were chosen when they were about 6, and once they were 40, they could leave the service of the Vestal Virgins. Very interesting reading about them. So in the time of the early church, the contemporaries noted that Christians were committed to sexual purity, and people who observed this actually really admired it. It's very interesting in our sexualized society. That was what the Christians were known for. So it's written that the Christians repudiated adulterous glances, they avoided second marriages, and committed themselves to lifelong continence. And one philosopher of the time wrote that he was deeply impressed by the Christians' sexual behaviour. Their restraint in cohabitation compelled him to take their faith seriously. Because in that day, men were married, they had a wife, but they often had mistresses. They could have sexual relations freely with slaves and with others around. They could go to the temple and be with the prostitutes. They could do anything. And so the Christians didn't do that. So that was something that really stood out. So what could we say about the church today? Could we say that about the church today? That what stands out in the church, the Christian church, is their sexual purity. And we've been talking about this over the last how many days? 78% of young people 18 to 24 in the church, this is a US stat, consume porn. And just overall, men in the church, 65% of men. It's very hidden, but it's there. And imagine how much more authority we'd have if we had sexual purity within marriage. And, I've been talking about this with my Lost Boys presentation, that the average age boys see porn is 9, some much younger than that. But we're seeing, if that figure is right, and I'm pretty sure it's actually low, but if what we're seeing in the church is a whole generation of sexually broken young people. And those sexually broken little kids grow into teenagers and grow into adults and go into marriage completely sexually broken. So we have to really address that as a body of Christ. Otherwise, we have no witness, we have no authority, we have hidden sin within. And that, when we have that, we can't speak out with authority about sin. Okay, let's go on. It's such a tragedy. It's one of my things I'm deeply concerned about. This is interesting, men, women and children. So in Roman culture, the men gathered together, the men could go and see the prostitutes, the men could do all this sort of stuff. But what was unusual was that the Christians all met together. Old men, young men, children, old women, young women, and they all met together and they had a beautiful fellowship and unity in the body. In fact, I was saying this yesterday to some, at lunch, we had lunch, that people, they didn't have open churches in the early church, because if you went to church, you could be arrested. So they met in houses and people couldn't even go to church. They had deacons at the door to stop anyone. It just wasn't open for people to come, because it was a way to equip the saints for them to worship God freely together and all that sort of thing. And so anyone just couldn't come in. And so you couldn't even partake in the closed fellowship unless you were baptized. It was very interesting how they ran church, how church functioned. I'm not saying we do it or anything like that. I'm just saying it's a lot to think about. So they had the unusual practice where they all met together. In particular, the most despised of society were the older women. And children were ignored. But the difference was that Christian families taught their children in godliness and righteousness. And they did it purposefully because they knew they were discipling them. They didn't leave it to the world to disciple, or they didn't just ignore them, or thought, oh, well, by osmosis they'll just see what we do and they'll just do it. It was done purposefully. And women were very active in the church, early church, and it's thought that women probably were the church's most effective evangelists. Who's to know that? I don't know. That's what I've read in some of the old books. And what was it that this was another attribute that attracted outsiders? It was their love for one another. They really loved one another. Let's go on. Now, this is interesting. Manifestations of divine power. So the early church Christians were faced with forces that they saw as evil. They were social forces, they were spiritual, they were economic, they were religious, they were political. But nevertheless, the Christians saw all of these things as spiritual. Spiritual struggles that were hostile to human flourishing. And they believed that they could defeat these forces through prayers for exorcism and healing. So according to Clement of Alexandria, when Christians joined together for worship, they were a ragtag army of God-fearing old men, God-beloved orphans, widows armed with gentleness, and men adorned with love. And they asked God for the subduing of sickness to be put to flight with the laying on of hands and the shattering of violence of demons, which would be reduced to impotence by confident commands. The Christians became known to their contemporaries as healers and exorcists. It's a good one. This next one, care for the poor. So in the early church world, there were many, many poor. In Roman society, it's believed that around 65% of the people lived close or below subsistence level. And care for the poor was a fundamental commitment the Christians made at their baptism. The practical application of charity was a powerful cause of the Christian success. In fact, one writer, I haven't got it here, but one writer, one of the leaders of the Roman, in an area of the Roman Empire at the time, said, the Christians are putting us to shame, the way they care for the poor. You know, so as the government, we need to do something. Can we say that the Christians are putting us to shame? Or we'll just leave it to welfare. We pay our taxes, so we can just leave that to welfare, and the government will sort it out. And it's interesting, you know, as I've been reading through the Old Testament, and you see the complaints all the time, what the prophets spoke out about against the people. And it was really interesting. This has really got me thinking, because the women, there was so many times it said the women don't care for the poor and needy. They're going around and how they look and all that sort of thing. And I thought, wow, isn't that amazing? Because in Proverbs 31, it lists this thing of a wife of noble character, and it says that she extends her hands to the poor and she opens her arms to the needy. And then all through the Old Testament prophets, it was actually saying the opposite. She doesn't extend her hands to the poor or open her arms to the needy. And I thought, is that because women with the feminist movement are all told to get out into the marketplace because there's your value in your career and your independence and empowerment? We can barely look after our own marriages and ourselves. Oh, I just need a bit of time to myself, pamper myself. How many women's groups have I been in? I hope I'm not saying anything. I'm going to just go for it because I'm guilty of it as well. Let's just pamper ourselves. You know, we work so hard and we do all these things. And the women are being accused. Where are you extending your hands to the poor and opening your arms to the needy? We don't have to do that now because the government can do it. So, so as I said, the practical application of charity was a powerful cause of the Christian success. Let's go on. Oh, this one's a big one. The sanctity of life. Refusing to participate in the taking of human life in any form at all was a basic Christian commitment. And it was a product of the Christians' high value for life. Infant exposure was common. They would, if they didn't want the child, they would put them on the rubbish heap. And either slave traders would get them or Christians would hang around that rubbish heap. And that's why there were so many orphans. The Christians would take the babies home. So if a man went out to war and he came back and his wife had a baby, maybe she was pregnant when he left or whatever, he could just say, look at the child and just say, no. Or, even when a woman had a baby, the husband could give the thumbs up or the thumbs down. Now we don't need to see the baby. We can just give the thumbs up or the thumbs down. So human life was not valued in that culture. In fact, I found since abortion has been going, since Roe versus Wade, there was something like this is only recorded, 73 million abortions worldwide. I don't know if it's just in America or what, but I was thinking, wow, that's around 3 times, or probably over, something like over 3 times of Australia. What's our population now? 23 million? 26, oh, okay. Nearly 3 times, 2.5 times the whole population of Australia. We're little children. I told someone the other day I was on a plane and I was talking to a lady. She was a retired school teacher. And we were talking about different things. And then I said, yeah, you guys have got abortion here up to 9 months. And she said, no, we haven't got that. She said, you mean up to the day the baby's born you can have an abortion? I said, yeah. And she said, no, we don't have that. I said, you've had it for years. You need to look on your legislation. You can abort a baby like the day before the baby's born. It's actually, Victoria has the most draconian abortion laws behind China. We're supposed to be a nation that's predominantly Christian. How did that happen? Queensland voted that in a few years ago, actually, so Queensland's got it as well. There you go, that's our value for human life. Certainly a pagan culture we live in. Patience that does not compel. Christians never compelled anyone. They believe that God worked by means of persuasion and that he does not use violent means to obtain what he desires. No one can be forced to be a Christian. So the early church fathers believed that church growth would depend not on pressure or coercion, but on proof, on the believers' lives which demonstrated across time whether their beliefs had authenticity. So it was because the early church didn't fit in with its surrounding culture, but rather challenged it in love, that Christianity eventually had such effect on it. When Christians challenge culture by living their faith in righteousness, others will be intrigued and drawn to us. Others will actually hate us as well. The world and the spirit of the age will hate us, and we need to understand that. Just because we're hated doesn't mean we're doing something wrong. The Sermon on the Mount from Matthew 5 was often the only scripture that the early church believers had. And if you look through Matthew chapter 5, we hear from Jesus how to live our life and how to respond to hatred and hostility. It was a Sermon on the Mount. Here we have the Beatitudes. If you just think about this. In that culture, blessed are they. Now, blessed means happy, calm, forgiven, content, sheltered, refreshed, peaceful, spiritually alive. Blessed are those that hunger and thirst for righteousness. Blessed are those who are persecuted. Blessed are those who mourn. Blessed are those who are pure in heart. And then Jesus goes on to talk about being the salt of the earth and the light of the world. 2, what's in our heart? Like if we look at a woman or a man in lust, we're guilty of committing adultery in our heart. Or if we hate our brother, we're guilty of murder. So much about the heart. So discipleship was very important to the early Christians. I don't know why it's not so important today in the church. Which I said it was known as catechesis. It was the careful formation and teaching of new believers. And that would go for children, parents teaching the children. They have such an important responsibility. Can we say we were carefully overseeing the formation of our children's faith and belief in God? How many parents can say that? How much can we say it about new believers that come into our fellowship? So it wasn't just left to chance. Oh, they'll pick it up in the service. They'll pick it up. Our children will just pick it up from us and the way we live our lives. Actually, one of the things that I think I would, obviously you look back raising your children and you think about what would I do different, because I was really, it was very important to me to oversee the formation of the faith in my children, with the teaching and so on. But I think I would do things, I would add some things that I didn't do, maybe not do things exactly the same. But one of the things I have noticed with my young adult children is, we'd talk about something and I'd say, yeah, I remember that happened to me. Yeah, I really had to seek the Lord about that. And yeah, I really struggled with that. And the Lord helped me to get set free from that because I did this. And I tell them that and they go, why didn't you tell us? I've suffered with that for years. Like I wrote in my Lost Boys book about how handle jealousy. It was so much part of me. I was so blind to jealousy and envy in my life. And how the Lord showed me that I had this ugly, ugly, ugly thing in my heart I could never experience the full joy of the Lord because of it. And I couldn't just rejoice and celebrate when good things happened to other people. Because I'd say, when people would say things really good happened to them, and I'd think, and I'd go, oh, that's so nice. And I knew I was fake, but I never pull this thing out and have a look at it. What is that? Until one day the Lord convicted me, what is that thing in your heart? And so I did. I went to my room and I pulled it out, spiritually, and put it before the Lord, and I saw that it was envy. And it's different from jealousy. Jealousy is, you've got that, oh, I want it too. But envy is, you've got that, and not only do I want it, I don't want you to have it. And it's rooted in idolatry. It's rooted in self. And when I was studying about it, it says it's one of the most odious sins. And I see it's rampant in the world. So rampant. If we can help people get set free of jealousy. So I shared these stats over the last days, and I'm going to share them again because some of you haven't seen them before. If we as a church look exactly like the world, doing the same things and valuing the same things, then we become irrelevant. We're just a nice group of happy people. We'll welcome you, give some food, a cup of tea. So the Barna study says that this was 2021 in the US, 69% of people self-identify as Christians. So they tick the box, are you a Christian? Yes. Then after digging down, they've got to answer up to 50 more questions, all about things like, what is marriage? Is it between a man and a woman or whatever? What is the Holy Spirit? Is the Word of God God's Word, or is it just a set of guidelines? All sorts of questions like that. And they found that of that 69%, only 6% had something or somewhat of a biblical worldview. And 18 to 29-year-olds, I think it was, had 2% a biblical worldview. It changes your perspective when you think of salt and light in the world. And 37% of US-based pastors hold a biblical worldview. Very big today, progressive Christianity, which has redefined what Christianity is like. Just so that we can be more, not as unloving to the world, not like hateful, that we become more like the world to win the world. So, yeah, we embrace all that. We're good with that. We love you anyway. So, Christianity as a counterculture. Are we a counterculture to the world? I know I've got two different scriptures here. I've got Romans up there, which I'll read in a sec, but I want to read you this one from Timothy 3, 1-5. But mark this. There will be terrible times in the last days. People will be lovers of themselves, lovers of money, boastful, proud, abusive, disobedient to their parents, ungrateful, unholy, without love, unforgiving, slanderous, without self-control, brutal, not lovers of the good, treacherous. Friends will betray you like that. rash, conceited, lovers of pleasure rather than lovers of God, having a form of godliness. Hey, is this talking about Christians or people who profess to be Christians? Lovers of God, having a form of godliness but denying its power. Have nothing to do with such people. It's interesting, as I was reading that, I was thinking, what if you did the opposite word, like proud, humble, boastful, lovers of money, lovers of themselves, or lovers of God. Very interesting. So, boastful and proud, I just want to pick that up. What does that look like in this era with social media? Selfies, platforming ourselves. Hey, just want to tell you, I love this person. It's great doing life with them. Oh my goodness. Every time I see that, I'm sorry if someone, I'm sorry, but it's all about self. It's not about the other person you're doing life with. It's, look at me, everything's going well for me. I thought about that recently because my sister lost her husband 2 years ago. There's people who are really suffering. And, everyone has to, their anniversary, hey, I've been doing life with this fantastic person. And I just felt really sad for my sister when I see that, because I just think, she's grieving the loss of her husband. And we just need to be careful about those things. Just saying what's on my mind and my heart. But it just always seems to be about ourselves and marketing ourselves. I hate it. It makes me so sick. I have to have a Facebook page for, Youth for Christy type stuff. And even when I post one thing, it's not often, maybe once a month or something like that. I hate what it does to me because I know I'm so vulnerable. Yeah, I know I love attention and I know what it does to me. I hate it. But not just that. There's sacred things in your life. Very sacred things. Your marriage, children. There's nothing sacred anymore. You're just showing everything to the world. Lovers of money? Surely we're not like that. But materialism gets us all. We do love nice things too much. Nice homes, nice clothes, nice car. And we fall into the conspicuous consumerism of the world. When we talk about lovers of selves, what do we mean? Self-love is narcissism. And I'm speaking to myself as well. I said to Britt in the car yesterday, and then I thought, I really let it go. And I said, because I know I'm so narcissistic. And I thought, I've admitted it, but I am. I know that's my natural bent, and I have to work really hard against it. That we just gravitate toward that. Self-preservation. Being overly concerned about this life. We get fearful. What other people think of us. And self-worship is lifting ourselves above God. Self-actualization. That's the top. Has anyone ever seen that pyramid? What's it called? Maslow's pyramid of needs? I don't know if you know, the very top of that is self-actualization. The next one is self-esteem. And I write about that in my book because there's this whole movement in self-esteem. That the whole thing, the whole theory behind that is that, is something like if people feel good about themselves, so if the children feel good about themselves, well, then they will perform better. They'll perform better in school. They won't have teen pregnancy. They won't be criminals, all of that sort of thing. They won't go off. So you just praise people up all the time, which is a total opposite to the military, because in the military they break you down. They break you completely down to nothing, and then they build you up. And once you can start, you're physically able to meet all the expectations. You can stand up straight for hours in a line. You can do all of these things. That's what builds your esteem. It's achievement. And not that we're talking about work-based or anything like that, but, how good does it make you feel when you stand against a temptation? You just get stronger, and then you get stronger, and then you get stronger. Or when you start applying God's word, you get stronger and stronger and stronger. But if people are going, oh, you're great, you're fantastic, and the words mean nothing anymore. Everyone gets an award. We're all winners in school. Well, that's the second on Maslow's. It's a godless theory, and self-actualization is putting confidence in the flesh over the Holy Spirit. And I write much more about this self-actualization. It's very interesting, and I'm not going to go into it, but you will see that it's very big and it's hidden in us. So at the start, I spoke about habitus, how we live out our daily lives with all the things that come at us in the course of life. Well, my question is, are we living for ourselves or are we living for God? And this morning when, I'm just going to end on this morning when I was reading my chapters, I read through the Bible chronologically, and it was the last chapters of Zechariah, and there's a lot of prophetic about the coming Messiah, how he's going to return the same way he came, and how he's going to return back to the Mount of Olives, and it's going to split. All of these amazing prophecies. But it said in the last chapter, I think it's chapter 14, it was talking about, with this return of the Messiah, and it said that even the bells on horses and even the cooking pots will have an inscription on them. Holy to the Lord. So basically when the Messiah returns and we're in his kingdom, everything, even the bells on horses, even the cooking, will be holy to the Lord. And it really challenged me because I thought, in Christ, we are holy to the Lord. And it was saying that the high priest in the Old Testament had this metal band because they had to wear this all these garments to go into the temple. So the high priest had a band around his head, and inscribed in it was holy to the Lord. Some versions say holiness to the Lord, but it was holy to the Lord. And now we're the priesthood of believers. Are we living our life, our habitus? Are we holy to the Lord? Are we set apart in this world, holy to the Lord? I'm going to finish now on that note. Brothers and sisters, holy in the Lord. Let's pray. Father, have mercy on us, your people. We want to be holy to you, and we fall far short. I know I do. I'm even embarrassed to think of my heart attitude behind so many things I do. And this morning, in front of my brothers and sisters, I want to renounce my selfism, putting myself as the authority of my own life. And I resolve by your grace to set myself against this inclination. And I pray for my brothers and sisters as well. This inclination to go towards self-worship, self-preservation, self-authority, independence against you. And Father, by your grace, I ask that you would help us to follow you in holiness and the righteousness that you have provided for us in your Son, our Saviour, Christ Jesus. We love you. We thank you. And we commit the rest of the day into your hands. And Father, I know that we're going to be praying for people afterwards. Father, I pray that you would heal hearts here. Heal us, your people. Maybe be vessels set apart for holiness. I pray in Jesus' name. Amen.